Does Colossians 2 say that the law was nailed to the cross and is done away with, and that you cannot judge anyone for not keeping the Sabbath? Let's find out by reading it. No commentary, no interpretation, no theology. Let's find out. So where people get this from is verse 16. Therefore, no one is to act as your judge in regard to food and drink, or in respect to a festival or a new moon or a Sabbath day. Things are which only a shadow of what is to come, but the substance belong to Christ. Sounds pretty clear cut, right? And then let's go to the part where they think the law was nailed to the cross. In verse 14, having canceled the certificate of debt consisting of decrees against us, which was hostile to us, and he has taken it out of the way, having nailed it to the cross. So people think those decrees against us is the law from the Old Testament, the law of Moses, which was hostile to us. So they think that the law was hostile to us. Now, for starters, there was nothing in the Bible anywhere that would claim the law was hostile to you. And do you think those were the decrees that Paul's talking about? Well, let's ask Paul himself. Verses 1 through 7 of Colossians 2 is pretty much an introduction to the chapter. When you go to verse 8, we finally see Paul's point in what he is saying. See to it that there is no one who takes you captive through philosophy and empty deception, in accordance with human tradition, in accordance with the elementary principles of the world, rather than in accordance with Christ. So he's talking about people that are preaching man-made traditions, not the law. Now, for some reason, when it gets to verse 14, people think the context all of a sudden randomly changes to the law. And they think that it also says that in verse 16. But see, we know that it isn't, because Paul tells you what the decrees are, verses 20 through 23. Let's find out what the decrees are that Paul's referring to. If you have died with Christ to the elementary principles of the world, why, as if you were living in the world, do you submit yourselves to decrees such as Paul's? Because he said these elementary principles of the world, the same thing he just said in verse 8. We know the context hasn't changed at all. He's still talking about the same thing he was talking about in verse 8. But watch this. Why do you submit yourselves to decrees such as do not handle, do not taste, do not touch, in accordance with the commandments and teachings of men? These are matters which do have the appearance of wisdom and self-made religion and humility and severe treatment of the body. Severe treatment of the body. Remember? Go back to verse 14. It says those decrees were hostile towards you. So we know that that's talking about man-made commandments and man-made traditions now, because Paul just told us. He said that it's severe treatment of the body, but are of no value against fleshly indulgence. So Paul explains to us what the decrees are. I know people are going to think Bryson, but it literally says Sabbath day and food and drink in respect to festival or new moon. Well, that's because the Pharisees put unbiblical extra rules on top of the Sabbath. How do we know this? They claim Jesus broke the Sabbath. And if Jesus broke the Sabbath, Jesus would be a sinner. So we know he didn't break the Sabbath, but he broke the man-made traditions of the Sabbath. That's why he debated the Pharisees when they made that claim. Jesus never said, yep, I did it. No, he debated the Pharisees on that claim. Same thing when it comes to food and drink. Now, this is not talking about dietary laws. If you go back to Matthew 15, the Pharisees required Jesus' apostles to wash their hands before they eat bread. And what did Jesus say? Jesus said that you are pitting your man-made traditions over the commandments of God. And that's interesting, because at that point in Matthew 15, he was making a public display of the Pharisees, which if you go back to verse 15 in Colossians 2, when he had disarmed the rulers and authorities, he made a public display of them, having triumphed over them through him. So Colossians 2, according to Paul himself, is talking about man-made traditions that the Pharisees added on top of the commandments, and not the actual commandments. Just the Bible.